What's cracking, internets? Welcome to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, Mahin Islam, and I'm joined today by Mustafa Tameez, who was recommended to me by some folks down here in Houston to have a conversation with. He is a former campaign strategist for the local Democrats here in Texas. You have a
firm called Outreach Strategies.
Outreach Strategy, and then a lot of y'all may know him because if you tune into FoxNews or watch Tucker Carlson, you may have seen this gentleman, go into the firing pit, so to speak. So appreciate Mustafa coming on. I know you busy guy. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you grew up in New York City, but as far as how you got into the whole Democratic Party scene.
Well, I moved to Texas in 1994.
Okay.
I was in the advertising business for a long time. And then I started getting involved in politics around 2000. And the very first campaign I worked on was for a guy named Lee Brown, who was the incumbent mayor of Houston. And he was on a big race against Orlando Sanchez, who ran against him, was endorsed by the Bush family, the President of the United States, endorsing a candidate against an incumbent mayor of Houston. So that became a big race. And I worked on that race, did really well. Got recruited onto the next mayor's race for a guy named Bill White.
So the first gentleman was a Republican?
No, it was a Democrat, Mayor Lee Brown. He was the first African-American mayor of Houston.
But he was endorsed by...
His opponent was endorsed by the President of the United States. So imagine being an incumbent mayor of the fourth largest city.
Yeah.
And the President of the United States, George Bush, who is from Texas.
Right.
Endorsing your opponent.
Okay, so I'm trying to think, because wasn't Bush first. This is Bush Senior, right? Herbert Walker. He was like 88 to 92, so in that time frame.
Well, no, this was in 2001.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So when the George W. Bush was the president,
I got you.
His father lived here in Houston.
I see.
And generally, what happens is if you're an incumbent mayor, in Houston, you automatically in the past when it was 2-year term got elected. That race became really important because at that point Democrats had lost all races across the state. The Texas House was going to be lost with the following year, and the Houston mayor was the last big office that Democrats held in Texas.
Sure.
And so in that time, it was just a very notable race around the country to watch what happens. Can Lee Brown, who was a cabinet official in the Clinton administration, first African-American mayor, hold Houston against a guy named Orlando Sanchez, a Cuban-American, endorsed by the president, supported by the president's father, who lived in Houston.
Okay.
Running against him in a multi-million-dollar race.
I got you. So that was the first campaign. How did you get, what were you doing before they got you even pulled into that kind of work?
I had an advertising business, and a friend called and said, "Hey, we should contribute to Mayor Lee Brown." I reluctantly hadn't really given a lot of money in politics. They said, "You're a young man. We need people like you. You should come. And I finally didn't know how to say no. So I contributed. I sat next to Mayor Brown. I asked him, how will he take this money and spend in mobilizing the South Asian community? He said, I don't know what we do. And so we started a conversation. I got a call from his campaign manager saying, you had a conversation with Mayor Brown. I want to talk to you. And then from there, that's how I got in.
Okay. Did you already consider yourself more aligned, democratically, personally, or?
Our state of politics are that, when I was in New York, I would say I was probably a soft Republican in New York. By the time I got to Texas, I was almost like a fringe Democrat because, depending on where you are in the country and how you think about politics, those labels get defined by where you are, not necessarily they're hard and fast.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I didn't tell you this. So I actually worked on Bush Cheney 04. I was a volunteer for that campaign, and people are like, wait, and they're always like, that's the second Bush? I'm like, yeah. So they're like, after 9/11, after Patriot Act, all that. I'm like, yeah. And, I'll be honest, at the time, a couple years before, I was living in Canada. I went to school in Toronto for a couple years just to get away from things. And Toronto, Canada being just obviously more left-leaning country than America, I think that a lot of my conservatism kind of bred out of the reaction to that. And I just thought about that when you were just talking about where you're at. And so that's it kind of bred into that a little bit. Now I don't know where I stand right now, to be honest. I'm kind of like just still figuring things out, but it's like things change a lot. There's like a lot of fluidity, it seems like, but yeah. What are your thoughts about as a Muslim American? There seemed to be you mentioned you were kind of like maybe a little bit of a Republican back in New York. It seemed that there's an idea that pre 9/11, like a lot of immigrant Muslims were like Republicans, right? And that's kind of why that helped George W. Bush get elected. And then the 9/11, the rise of the neocons and whatnot, and now it's completely flipped. Now it's like it's really hard to find like a Muslim like Republican or someone who's actually going to admit they are a part of the GOP. Do you think we were like a little too reaction, like these like an extreme swing like that? I think if I look at it objectively, is that really like healthy? Do you think?
Look, I was a soft Republican in New York because I was young, I was single, I was making a very comfortable living, and I felt like I paid too much taxes in New York.
Right.
And so I moved to Texas because there was no state income tax in Texas. And so in my mind, this whole from a Democrat Republican lens, I was a soft Republican because I moved to Texas because there were no state or city income tax here.
Right.
And I wasn't really partisan. I really didn't think about politics a whole lot.
Yeah.
And for most people, most Americans, and I would even say most people around the world, people don't get up in the morning and think about partisan politics. They get up in the morning because they have to go to work.
Yeah.
They have to take care of their families. The political chattering class is a small part of every place, whether in the United States or around the world, that think and breathe and see everything from a political lens. Okay. For most people, life is about their kids and the future of their kids. And I think and that's why I think the labels switch and change when big events in the world happen or big events in the country happen.
Right.
The Republican Party that existed for when Reagan was around is not the Republican Party that exists today.
Correct.
And so not only the country's evolved, but our perception of who identifies as a Republican has changed.
Right. Moving on back to the whole campaign manager, when folks would approach you to they'll say, hey, Mustafa, I want to run for mayor, or I want to run for like city council or whatever. I mean, and Houston is a pretty influential. It's the fourth largest city in America, like you said. What are the kind of questions you're asking them to, kind of filter it out? Is like, hey, because I'm sure there's like right now in the presidential election, there's 20 candidates on Democrat side right now still, and so it's like there's too much. But what kind of questions are you asking these folks, or like how do you maybe vet or like maybe try to make sure they know what they're doing?
Well, first I try to talk people out of running all the time.
Oh, that's your default position.
Because in essence, if I could talk them out of running,
yeah,
then they shouldn't have run in the first place, right? I mean, the people that should run should have a real deep desire to serve.
Okay.
You don't run to be important. You should be important, and therefore you should run. You should have a life of contribution, so that when you run for public office, you're able to talk about what you've done. Rather than run and become important, and then you can say, I'm an elected official, so I'm important. I think that's kind of like a distinction.
Yeah.
And so I really look for people that have made a contribution in some way or the other. They don't have to serve in the public space. They could have served in business. They could have served in lots of different ways. It has to be a different path. But you have to have done something and then be able to bring that experience to public service.
Mm. When you're running a campaign, then, are you doing anything on the side? Is it a side thing, or is that like your full focus at the time when you're running that?
So for 10 years, our business was just working on candidates. I mean, we did candidate races. So I worked for Bill White, who was the mayor of Houston. I was his campaign manager, political director. I did the race against Tom DeLay when he was incumbent congressman, a successful race for a guy named Nick Lamson.
Sure.
Did a race for a guy named Ciro Rodriguez, ran for Congress. Number of, congressional races, state house races, state Senate races, county races, over 24 different races over that course.
Okay.
And then around 2010, we got out of the candidate business, and we do more of public affairs and communications work now.
I got you. Now, I got to ask this question again. This is the Muslims who are tuning into the show are always like, we were talking offline. There's a perception like most Muslims today are voting like Democrat, right? But there are some folks who either are voting Republican still, or they're not even participating in the process because they're saying that, right, it's all corrupt and whatnot. But one of the specific issues that people have, there's some issues that people have a hang up with, and that's like, I hear a lot. It's like abortion and, the LGBT movement, right? And obviously it's a piece of the Democratic platform. I feel like people have blown it up to be like all of it. It's like an all or nothing approach. Have you faced like pushback from the community, from the Muslim community, on these issues at all as being part of the Democratic platform?
I think that there are some people that are stuck in not just the past, but 14th century past.
Okay.
The world's moved on.
Right.
Either you're part of the constructive conversations where you're building a future, or you're just stuck on what can be divisive about. And I'll give an example of President Trump. Right?
Sure.
I mean, President Trump's entire narrative is about make America great again, and he basically has the same frame that what was the yesteryear was so great that we want to be like what we used to be. It's this false nostalgia that doesn't exist. That if you go back to that time period, the communities of color, other minority groups, women, everybody was not really equal. They really didn't have a great life.
Right.
And neither did this nation. This nation is far more freer and opener. The economy is better. It's more inclusive. The world is a much better place than it used to be. So that nostalgia is really used to say, I am better than you because I am more pure than you.
Right.
And in every faith tradition, arrogance is the first sign that your heart is not pure.
Right. I got you. I was like, I got to cover that. That's kind of my, I was telling somebody the other day, like, listen, I might disagree with some of the positions of some folks, right? Like Congresswoman Ilhan Homer is getting a lot of flack these days, right, from some parts of the Muslim community. And I was like, listen, I asked the guy, like, listen, if you were in her district in Minnesota, would you vote for her? He's like, yeah. All right, it's the bottom line, right? So like sometimes we like to be idealistic sometimes in terms of like things, but we ourselves don't even. I like, for me, it's like personally, am I doing everything idealistic, or striving, like aiming for it as a goal? Sometimes, but sometimes I'm just like, no, I'm not. Right? We live our lives in a way that's, you give some, you take some. You know what I'm saying? Like I was talking to a friend last night, and he was like, yeah, we were all getting married to our wives and stuff, did we like ask for everything? She's got to be a Victoria's Secret model. She's got to be like Harvard, Ivy League educated, all that stuff. We made trade-offs. There's things that we like. There's things that we don't like. But yeah, we'll take that, right? And I think that's kind of where some folks need to just like maybe have a reality check. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about presidential policy.
But right? I would say that more than reality, I think people should look at themselves in the mirror and say, would they be on the cover of GQ?
Yeah.
Did they go to Harvard?
Right.
And the answer usually is the guy that wants that stuff.
Yeah.
He couldn't even buy the cover. He couldn't even buy the GQ magazine.
Yeah, right.
And he probably didn't even go to Harvard. He wouldn't even walk through Harvard, much less go there.
Right.
So the people that are more judgmental about others have the least to offer and the least to contribute.
Yeah, and I've seen that trend myself personally. I know we want to talk a little bit about the presidential elections. I had heard a piece that you had done on Fox News about, and I think you wrote something about this as well, that Beto O'Rourke, from your state of Texas, gives the Democrats, and this was from a year ago, gives the Democrats the best chance in 2020 to secure the White House. Do you still feel that way, and why?
Well, look, I think that, just kind of using the same kind of conversation, that a lot of times we're stuck in the past. We're so focused on what used to be, we never really see the opportunity that's ahead of us.
Right.
So the opportunity that's ahead of us is reframing the electoral map. Democrats have been winning the popular vote. Last election cycle, Democrats won 3.5 million more popular vote than Republicans did. Where we lose is in the Electoral College.
Sure.
And the Electoral College, the states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan were the states that we lost. And so we narrowed the entire election down to those three states, and begin to compete for a very narrow margin of voters. Instead, if we try to change the map and say, what if we took the 30 electoral votes of Texas and made Texas competitive? And so I believe someone like Beto O'Rourke, who's from Texas, who's a native son, who came between 2.5, 3 points of winning against Senator Ted Cruz, who is from Texas, ran a very competitive race, raised almost $81 million, bulk of it online and small donors. If he were to be the challenger against President Trump, who's far more unpopular in Texas than Ted Cruz was, that he would win Texas. And if we won Texas and 30 electoral votes, you change the map. And so whether it's a political party or a faith community or an ethnic community, rather than trying to play the game as it used to be, where you marginally lose every single time, why not change the game? Why not look at the future and say, why don't we define it in a way that not only we get what we want, but others will get what they want as well? And that, I think, makes a better world and makes a better party.
Do you feel that the ultimate objective of the Democrats today is that Trump is not reelected?
Well, I think that both parties have kind of taken that stance. I think if you look at really focus group data and you ask people, why are they really Republicans? Underneath all of it, they will tell you they hate liberals and they hate Democrats. And if you ask Democrats underneath everything else, why are you really Democrats? I hate Trump and they hate Republicans, and that just seems to be like a cycle. They don't.
So your
like
identity is what you hate, not what you're for.
And that, I think, is I think that's harmful. I think that we really should be what we're about and what we're for rather than what we're against. And that's why I think Texas is important, that if you put Texas in play where both parties have to compete for Texas, then the center of American politics will begin to change. Right now, when a Democrat runs for the presidency, conventional wisdom says they have to come a little bit to the right to get elected to the presidency. If Texas becomes competitive, that means that every Republican will have to come a little bit to the left to get elected.
Okay.
And that means that the center of American politics is more important than the either fringe of the left or the right.
Okay. So that's a good point. See, right now, when I talk to people on the ground, you meet a lot of people who are for Bernie or Elizabeth Warren or even Andrew. I mean, in Chicago, I went to an Andrew Yang rally, and it seems like he's not like near the top. I don't think everyone necessarily expected him to be like competitive, but still hanging around. But one of the sentiments that I've heard from some folks who have been like Democrats their entire life is that they are tired of like, some of the more traditional candidates. That's why they like the Bernies or the Elizabeth Warrens or the Yangs, in the sense that to the point where they feel like they might even consider voting for Trump for this reason, depending on who wins on the Democrat side. Not to mention names, but if there's a certain candidate, if the Democrats run a certain person against Trump, they're saying they might vote for Trump because they're saying that since 2016, the benefit of Trump being in office has been a heightened awareness, or like wokeness, as they call, right, of like people being active in like change and elections of people like AOC or Ilhan and etc. What are your thoughts on it? It's like you're almost like willing to like deal with it for another 4 years, but like maybe because I think their strategy is like long term, it might be better because we can then like do more of a dent.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Have you heard that before?
Well, I think that on both sides of the aisle, the Republicans, Democrats, I'll give you Steve Bannon's position. Sure. Steve Bannon truly does believe that that you really have to burn the place down to rebuild. Okay. He feels like that there is a reckoning coming that this race wars are actually a good thing. He feels that will reconcile politics for the long hand. And there are people on the left that also feel like, yeah, let's just have it out once and for all. Let's just beat them. So we may lose in the short run by and having another 4 years of President Trump, and maybe that's what will woke people up.
Yeah.
And I think that is an immature attitude, because what they don't recognize is that in that time period, people get hurt, lives get destroyed.
Yeah.
Kids get put in cages. Healthcare doesn't get fixed, so millions of people that have traumatic illnesses like cancer, they don't get the healthcare. It's very easy to be arrogant and say, I got mine and I'm fine.
Yeah.
Those other people can suffer.
Right.
There is no faith tradition that look kindly on the arrogance and does not care about the weak and the poor. Every tradition always comes from the space that says, go take care of the needy, take care of the poor, take care of the orphans. Now.
Yeah.
Not scorch earth so that we can build a better place, so that there won't be no orphans and no needy. There's a recognition in history and in time that there's always people that are in need.
Right.
And our obligation from faith, from politics, is to be of service to them. And so sometimes people ask over the years, like, what has driven you and why are you on the Democratic side? And I say that I see the role of government to be of service to its citizens,
right,
to help the poor, to help the needy. So when I moved from New York, I was leaning Republican because I was interested in my personal tax cut.
Sure.
And I stand as a Democrat today because I feel that this nation, the city, and the state has been good to me, and I have to now figure out how can I be of service to others.
Okay. For Texas to go Democrat in 2020, what do you think, what issue is the biggest pain point for Texans and when it comes to the federal election?
Well, Texas became a majority-minority state in 2004. And since then, we have been moving in this direction. And Texas also has become, every election cycle, more of an urban state.
Yeah.
And so not just demographically Texas is changing, where we live is changing, and we're also changing generationally. We are one of the younger states in the union. So you have a lot of shift that's occurring in Texas. The fastest demographic change are not Latinos. It's not Asians. It's people with, two different ethnicities as their parents, right? And then it's Asian Americans, and then it's Latinos. Mm-hmm. So it's a very mixed state that is becoming more urban. Mm-hmm. And so in this election cycle, there is a chance that you might even see more millennials voting than baby boomers. Mm-hmm. And Texas will lead that trend. And if that happens, Texas is likely to flip Democratic. It's not just the Hispanic vote, but it's the young people, women, it's communities of colors coming out in record numbers.
And because they're concerned about the issues of healthcare and education and what's happening at the border and whatnot.
I think that concern, at the core of it is what does it mean to be an American?
Okay.
I think that what the president has done is that he has, as you would say, woke the people up and asking on both sides of the aisle from every frame, what does it mean to be an American?
Yeah.
Is this an ideal that we aspire to that's written in the Constitution, or is this an ethnic creed?
Yeah.
And so that is driving a lot of this issue. So when you talk about immigration, right, what does it mean for birthright citizenship? And that's being challenged.
Yeah.
So immigration is just not about like how do we fix illegal immigration, but what does it mean? What does legal immigration mean?
Right.
When we talk about healthcare, it's no longer just how do we create access to healthcare that's affordable, but it is in the greatest nation, the biggest economy in the world, is this a right or not? Right. So these are like core issues that are being put together in Texas, we rank 48th in the nation in terms of education. So if the human capital of this nation and the state is the most important thing, if our children are our future, then why are we not investing in them?
Right. Final question before we wrap up here. I asked this to all the guests. This show's called Sultans and Sneakers. So you're wearing some Adidas today?
Yes.
Are you in what's your favorite piece of footwear, or is there a fashion piece or accessory that you're like really into?
I like my Adidas.
Yeah. They look really comfortable.
I wear these a lot. I think that the other day I was wearing
Ultra Boosts?
Yeah, those are my Ultra Boosts.
Okay.
The other day, so I wear jeans and a blazer and my Ultra Boost. And the other day I put on slacks and I was wearing my Ultra Boost. And then I think I went a little too far because I looked down and it looked like I just turned into my dad wearing sneakers on a suit.
They can pull the. I saw Mehdi Hassan last night. He was wearing a suit with like some white sneakers. Well, Friday night, I want to say. I think, yeah.
Mehdi's cool. I'm not cool. I'm old and I'm losing hair. I can't pull it off like Mehdi can.
But well, sir, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know you got a packed schedule, but I think a lot of folks can benefit from this conversation.